All right, let's build out this full CRUD application. I want to start in the first half of this video by just walking you through what we're going to build, and the second half we'll look through the existing code that you can download. So to start with, we've got this thing, we're calling it bookends library. You can click here to get back to the home page, but if I come over here and do add new, I can search for any book. So let's look for something like Harry Potter, and when I search for this, it hits an open API for books and returns these results. So I can scan through them, see what's available, and then go ahead and add any of them I want, like this. Now, as soon as I do that, a couple of things happen. You see, I've got this dynamic page that's been generated, and I've got it set to read. I want to read this book. I can also come in here and change it to reading or read or whatever. All right, so back over here, or I guess that was read, right? Let's do Harry Potter again, and we'll add another one. Now, you can obviously change this as you want to. There may be other kind of ways you want to set this up. We're going to do this one more time. This time I'll look for one of my favorite authors. This is Robin Sloan, and we'll add one of his books. So how about Sourdough? That's a favorite. All right, and then back over here, we'll go to our library, and you'll see the things I want to read here are all showing here. Now, I can change one of these to something like reading, and you'll see that now it says currently reading up top. The want to read is down this way. Now, again, I might come in here and change one to read, and that will now move down this way. So books I've read. So here we've got currently reading, want to read, and read. All right, so that's kind of how it works. When you jump into any of these books right here, I can come in here and remove it from my library. Right now, this just automatically does that, deletes it, and then we're set to go with just these two that are left. Now, I'm using Astro DB under the hood to store all this local data that I'm fetching back from this API response. But this gives us full functionality for create, read, update, and delete. Now, to get started with, you want to grab the code in the description for this lesson. Make sure you run npm I to install everything, and then npm run dev to get started. Now, for those of you who want a walkthrough of the code, I'll give you a brief walkthrough right here. And then if you don't care about that, no worries, just jump into the next lesson where we'll set up Astro DB. So here's the code. You'll see that it's a fairly basic project. In fact, we're going to try to not overcomplicate the design or anything else. I really wanted to, but I want to get this kind of focused exactly on the create, read, update, and delete. So we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. You'll notice that I've got two pages right now. We've got an index page that's very basic. Then I've also got a new page. This new page has a form right here, and then it also has, let's see, the search input, and then down here it has a spot to insert the list that I get back from the API. Now you may have noticed I had a little warning down this way, and that's because I actually have not installed the dependencies here, so it's telling me it can't find it, so you want to make sure you do that. Now both of them are using this base layout right here. The layout has a slot, which is where the page content goes. This layout also includes an access to the nav, which just essentially has a button to go home to the library, and then another button here for going to the new route. So that's fairly basic and straightforward. Importantly, though, this also links to a style sheet. Now, as I've done with several of the projects, I'm just using standard CSS here, but it's not like super optimized, and there's probably some other best practices you'd want to do, but I want to focus on the code and not on everything else. So I've just done kind of my best to quickly scaffold out some CSS that should work, assuming that you're set and kind of follow everything I do in this tutorial. Obviously, you can change this as you want, and you may find that for you, tutorials work better if you just kind of make them your own. That's totally fine. But if you want to follow me and you want the CSS to work, you're going to have to follow me exactly. Now, we've also got a couple other things here. The data is just some site data here that we're pulling in if we do not pass in a like page title or description. And then we've got some components here. One would be for this author pill, which just formats the list of authors in a nice readable way. We've also got a book card component, which is just an LI item that includes the image, the title, and other things like viewing the book itself. Next, we've got the nav. I've already shown you that. And then we've got this reading select where we've got different options here that you can select yourself. And I've done some custom styling here with this custom select class. Now, again, if you're interested in how I set up the CSS, you're welcome to look at this. It's not the best CSS I've ever written, but essentially it's got a bunch of different variables, which is how I typically like to write CSS. And then I use those all throughout. And that way I can change it kind of in one area and everything updates for me down below. So that hopefully gives you enough of an idea of what's going on. There are a couple other small things like we've got some types here, so you can see what we're going to get back from OpenAPI or the OpenLibrary API. And we've also got the structure we want to finish with, which we'll set up here with Astro DB in a second. So that's kind of the starting code. Once you install it, you should be ready to go with the next lesson. Okay, hopefully you've got everything downloaded and installed and ready to go. Yours should look something like this, where I can go to the home page, I can go to an add new page, but if I type anything and I hit enter, obviously nothing's going to work because we haven't hooked anything up yet. So hopefully you're there. If you are, let's go ahead and start by adding in Astro DB. So I'm going to come over here to my terminal. We'll just do npx astro add db, just like that. And this will install Astro DB. Let's go ahead and choose yes to install the dependencies. And then I'll go ahead and scaffold out the proper files for config and the seed file, and then update my Astro config as well. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and get this back up and running. And I'm going to come over here, let's expand this out. And if I look over here, we now have this new folder called DB. Inside here is where we want to go ahead and add in our table for these particular books. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, we'll export this to find DB, but in here, the table I want, we're going to call book. All right, so up top here, let's go ahead and do const book equals like this. And we're going to pull in define table. This is a helper we get from Astro. And here you'll see that it pulled in from my node modules. I actually don't want that. So that's something you kind of have to pay attention to. Sometimes the import statement doesn't quite work correctly. So I want to pull this from astro:/db. So inside here, now what I want to do is pass along a config. So this will be my columns. We've done this before in the module on Astro DB, but here I'm going to have an ID. This will be column.text, and this is going to be a primary key. Now this means that it has to be unique, and I'll set this to true. I actually do need to pull in the column as well. This is also from astro:/db. Now, if you're interested in kind of the structure we want here, I actually do have a type set up for you automatically, just so that we can kind of follow along with that. So why don't we go ahead and just split and look over here. This is the same kind of thing we want. Now, I can't be quite as explicit here, but I do know the general thing I want. So I can say like title, for instance, and this will be column.text. And then let's go ahead and copy this down because we're going to have very much the same thing for the other ones as well. So we have the title, we've got the author. Now this author is actually going to be an array of strings. So I'm going to set this up as JSON and we'll parse that out later. And then we've got cover. This is also text. That will just be a URL to the text, to the URL for the image that we receive back from the API. And then finally, we'll have the status, which will be just one of 3 items, but I'll define that kind of in my code. And I know that it's going to be a string anyhow. It's going to look like this: reading, read, or to read. All right, so that's really all it takes. Now we've exported this here. Now to actually see this in action, I want to get up a seed file, and that way we can actually make sure that everything else we've got is working. So if we come over here, I should be able to await db.insert, and then I want to insert into the book. This is the specific table that I've set up, right? So let's go ahead and pull that in. Again, it should come from Astro DB. Now I have this, since I've made this table right over here. If you haven't done that yet, obviously you won't see this import showing up for you. Now what I want to do is insert some values, and this is going to be an array of items. We're just going to insert 1, but I have an ID, let's say something like 1. The title, we can say whatever we want, whatever. And the author, this needs to be an array like this. So we'll do like Joe or something. And then let's see what else we have. The cover, I've gone ahead and just dumped in one of the covers from OpenLibrary, which is what we'll look at here in a second. And then finally, we have the status. This needs to be either reading, read, or to read. So we'll do reading like that. And assuming that we did all this correctly, let's go ahead and close this down over here. And I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Let's refresh here. I should actually see this one pulled in if we pull it in the front index page. So let's go ahead and do that. We've got more we're going to do with this later, but for now, let's just go ahead and say const books equals. I'm going to await from DB, which I'm not seeing pulled in automatically by the extension, but I can just come up here and do import DB. This will be from astro:/db, just like that. All right, now what we want to do is await here. We want to select anything that has the book. Again, I need to pull book in from Astro DB. This should really probably be right here so that they pull in together, just like that. And I forgot the ways Drizzle does this is it's just a select and then you pass in from like this. And here is where you pass in what you want. So we've got the books right here. I can console log this and I should get something back when I come over here to refresh. So there we go. Got it coming in right here. Let's go ahead and pass this down just so we get a sample of what's going to happen. We've got a book card right like that. And this has a prop called book. This will just be our books. That'll be the very first one. Now that should pull this all in. You can see it does that right here. Obviously it doesn't know the structure. So we'll set all that up later, but I just want to make sure that it's actually working properly. And you can see that it is. So we got all the stuff set up properly for Astro DB. In the next video, we're going to look at the actual API and make sure that we can get back the request we want from OpenLibrary. Last time we set up our config for Astro DB. Now what I want to do is hit our API endpoint so that we can dynamically grab data and add it to Astro DB. We're going to do this in 2 stages. So in this video, we will work on the back end, so how we're going to set up our API. And in the next video, we'll actually hook up the front end so that we can do this dynamically. Let's go ahead and get rid of this book card just so it's not showing on the front page. So I'll do that first. And then let's come over here and under the pages directory, I want to add a new folder. So this will be called API. And then I'm just going to call the actual endpoint books.json.ts. Now I'm calling it .json because I expect to get JSON back. So that gives me a few little nice helpers. You can also just do .ts and just make sure to return it as JSON so that it knows what it's getting. So let's go ahead and do a get endpoint here. We're going to create this from scratch. We'll call it export const get all uppercase. That's important for Astro. And here I want to type this as an API route. Now you may not be used to using TypeScript. Don't worry, we're not going to do anything too complex, but I'm going to go ahead and grab the request that I get back here. And I need to make sure that I eventually return something. So I can return a new response just to make sure that this is working. And right now it's just like json.stringify. We'll do something like success equals true. All right, so whenever I hit this endpoint here at books, then I should be able to get this back. So I should be able to come over here. We'll just do API books.json like that, and I get success true. So cool, it is actually working for us. Now, the API I'm using is this OpenLibrary API. It doesn't require a key or anything like that. There are some limitations. So what we're going to do is use it very simply, and we're going to use this search.json endpoint. You can notice that when you hit this endpoint, you get back a ton of data. So all this data, you can see that's way too much for what we want to actually be hitting. So we can limit it by how many we want, and that will help us. Here it's found 802 for this particular search. I went ahead and grabbed this and created a type from it so that we have a good sense of what we'll get back. I haven't checked this exactly. I just used it like a converter I have that said, hey, this is probably what the type looks like. So I should be able to get back the docs and pick off from those docs the items that we need to store in our database. Hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to hit this endpoint right here, and let's just jump back this way, and I can copy this right like this. Obviously, we want this like query to be a little bit like more dynamic than it is right here, so it's not going to be hard coded, but at least right now that should help us. So let's come over here, and I'm going to first of all get the query params. So this will be based on what I pass in, and then we can return early if no params. So I'll show you what we're going to do there in a second, and then finally let's go ahead and query the API endpoint. All right, so we'll do all these steps 1 and 2 later. I just want to put them in here because we're going to make it dynamic and I want to remind us of that. For now though, let's just go ahead and query the endpoint as if we got those params back. So we're going to do a little try catch here. So I've got this try catch helper here where inside try, we're going to first of all grab the response here. So we'll do await, and this will be fetch, and we're just going to fetch that endpoint straight away. And again, I'm just going to hard code it for now. Obviously later we won't do that. Now, whenever you do this, you do need to go ahead and check to see if res.ok. In other words, you may have an actual problem with that and it won't actually be caught as an error. So you have to throw that manually, unfortunately. So throw new error, and then we're just going to say failed to fetch books. Now, we want to catch any errors that we throw. So I'm going to come down here, and first of all, we're going to console.error. This will just be server side, any errors that we get. And then finally, I want to return a new response. So very much like what we did down here. In fact, let's just copy this up like that. So we're going to return a new response, and I want all mine to look the exact same. I'm doing this in part because this is the way that Astro's actions work. So as you submit actions, you get back data and errors. And that's kind of the same structure I want to have here. That way, if you want to switch it out for it, you're welcome to, instead of manually hard coding all these endpoints. So we're just going to stringify an object. This will have data, in which case we'll have no data because we have an error, and we will have an error. Now the error could be either an instance of an error or just like a single text string. So we're going to check for that. So I'll say if error is instance of an error, and this is just for TypeScript, then we're going to pass back the error.message. Otherwise, we're just going to pass back the error. So either way, we'll get something back in this error field right here. So let's go ahead and just make sure that we have a problem here. So I'm going to change this to something like that. If I come over here and refresh, you'll see I get back null, and error is just failed to fetch books because this was not okay. So it is actually working for us. If I come back here, you'll notice we actually have a problem though, because we're not returning here. So the endpoint doesn't return a response. So we need to do the same thing up here, but obviously we want to do it after we get back the books. So first of all, what we're going to do is get back the books data. And then secondly, we want to query the response for the data we want. All right, hopefully that makes sense. And then we will finally return down this way. So let's go ahead and just return here. We're going to say error is null right here because hopefully there is no error, or we would have thrown it and caught it up earlier. And then we'll say the data is something else. So for now, we're just going to have an empty array like that. Okay, so first of all, let's get back the books data. So we'll just say data equals await, And now we know that res is responding, so we'll grab the JSON off of that. And that should give us the very same response that we expected earlier. So let's go ahead and, for now, we'll just return the data as is so we can see what that looks like. So if I come back over here, you should see that we get back the same thing we saw that they gave us, right? When we looked at their response, it's the same exact thing. We're just hitting their endpoint and kind of forwarding that on to us. Now this should have the same structure. In fact, you'll even see it has 802 responses, just like we saw earlier. So what we want to do now is pick off of those just the ones we want. Now there is actually an extra little helper here that we can add that limits the number we get back. So I'll do something like limit equals, I don't know, let's do like 5, all right? And now if I hit this again, you'll notice it's significantly smaller. It shouldn't give me back all of those. In fact, I should be able to just scan them very quickly like that. Still a lot of data, so maybe you just want to say, hey, let's just get back 1 for now. And you see how it's even smaller. Okay, so we're getting back the responses we want. I'll change this more to something like 6. And now what I want to do is pick off the individual items we need. Now you might remember I had an API response. Let's see, where was that? OpenLibrary TS. Yeah, here we go. So this is what we should be getting back here. So we can actually type this, and that will give us some help kind of out of the box. One of the main reasons people use TypeScript is just for that kind of stuff when you're structuring stuff out. So there are a couple ways to do this. I'm just going to come in here and let's go ahead and get the response back. So we'll say constant. We're going to call this books is what we're going to eventually get this to. And what would I want is the data.docs.map. We'll call it a book because that's what it is. And we're going to type it as Open Library Docs item, just like that. So I should be getting this back. And now when I go to actually return the object I want, it'll give me all the help I need. So let's come inside here and I'm just going to go ahead and grab this as an object. So I'm returning an object, which means I need to wrap it in parentheses. That's just a JavaScript thing. So I'm going to come in here to my title and I'm going to grab the book dot, and you'll notice I've got all this stuff right here, right? So I've got title, title sort, title suggest, title facet. I'm just going to grab the title. Then I've got the author, and I'm going to grab the book.author name. This is an array of strings. So if there's only one author, obviously there's only one item in the array. Now for the cover, this is a little bit different. In fact, if I were to jump over to the API docs, let's do that over here. You'll notice that I get back some things down this way. So like if I want to get just the image, I can fetch it like this. Now what I'm going to do is just go ahead and paste in this. You'll notice I'm going to covers.openlibrary.org, and then I'm picking off a book cover and passing in the medium version. That's the one I want back. Finally, the last thing I need here is a unique key. So we're going to grab this from the book.key, and then we're going to alter that a little bit, but I want to show you what we're going to get back if we don't. So first of all, I'm going to change this data to be my books that I get back. So now I'm processing it and just passing back the items I actually want. So if I come over here, you'll notice that's exactly what I get. Now I could zoom in here. This is still a little bit hard to read though. So one thing you can do is just come in here to the network. If I can do this like that, we'll refresh and grab this. And now in the response and the preview and the something, there we go. I should now get this structured out. So you'll notice I'm getting back the author, which is an array of strings, the cover, the ID, which starts with /works, and then actually has the unique ID and then the title. So I just want to get rid of this /works. That's a little awkward to deal with. So I'm going to come in here and we'll just go ahead and replace all. So off this string, and I just want to say anything that has works like this, replace it with nothing. All right, so it should just strip that right out. So if I come back over here, we refresh, you'll notice the IDs now no longer have that. Okay, so that's mostly all we need here. We're now actually getting back this and the structure that we want. We've got data, we've also got error, which is null because we should not have an error. If we do have an error, the data will be null and the error will be a string response with the message that we get back from the API endpoint or our own custom error message, which in this case, the only one we have is failed to fetch books. All right, in the next video, we're going to go ahead and set up the front end, which means we also get to pull in these query params as well. We've now successfully got our books API returning back to us the data in the structure that we want. Now, what we want to do next is come over to the new route, which is where we add in new books. We've got a form here called new book form search. That's the ID on it. We want to use this to take in whatever somebody has. It's required here as they go ahead and hit enter or submit the form by clicking the search button. It should then hit this script that we're going to have down this way. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to call this just, I guess let's just say new book search form, and we'll say document.query selector. And now we just want to pass in that query selector. Now, because I'm using TypeScript here, I'm going to just type it as an HTML form element like that. And now I know that I've got that in the document. All right, so I'm kind of telling TypeScript, I know it's there because it's right up here. And now I want to run like a little event listener off of this, right? So let's go ahead and have like event listeners down here. Listeners. All right, there we go. So we'll say new book search form dot add event listener. And we want to listen for the submit event. This means if they hit the search or if they hit enter on the keyboard, any way that you can submit an event, it should capture that. So let's go ahead and do an async call here, where we'll grab the event itself. And the first thing I want to do, as you typically do in JavaScript, is just prevent the default. So don't let it like submit to that page and refresh. Now, I want to check off of one thing, and that is while it has its searching to do, right? As it's going to hit that endpoint, let's come back over here like this. Actually, let me just open this up separately, and we'll go to new. All right, so as it hits this endpoint here, I'm going to go ahead and add the attribute of disabled to the form. That way you can't submit it multiple times because it takes a little bit for it to actually search. So the next thing I want to do is to check to see if it has that attribute. So I'm going to say if the new search form like this that has attribute, and the attribute I'm looking for is disabled. If it does, then I just want to go ahead and return. Let's see, I guess outside of here, right? So we'll return. So it cannot actually do anything if the attribute is disabled. All right, next thing I want to do is we're going to do another little try catch. We're going to hit our API endpoint, this time dynamically. Now up here at the form, because I've added a name of search here, I can actually use the form data API that I get built into JavaScript to pick off that individual item. There are other ways to do that, of course, as well, but I'm just going to go ahead and call this form data like this, and we'll grab the new form data. This is the JavaScript API, where we're just going to pass in the actual form itself. Now, what I want to do is just grab the search field off of this by doing form data.get, and the name I'm looking for is search. Now, this is, again, just normal JavaScript stuff, but what I'm doing is picking off this that has the name, the input that has the name of search. Without that, it won't actually give me anything. So assuming that that comes back properly, I'm going to then say that this is a string like this, and let's go ahead and just console log this. So let's come over here, we'll grab that, and then let's go ahead and say like hi or something. All right, so when I hit search, if I open up the console down here, it should say search is hi, and that's true. So that's what I'm actually getting back, just like I'd expect. All right, so next, now that we've got that, let's actually pass that to our API endpoint. So we're going to do something very much the same as we did before. Before we do that, though, I want to do the exact opposite of what we did earlier. So instead of checking to see if it has an attribute of disabled, I want to go ahead and make sure I set that. So we're going to say set attribute, and the attribute is disabled. We have to give it a value. It doesn't really matter. We could say true pizza. It doesn't matter if it has that attribute at all. It won't let us submit a second time. But now we've set that, so it should have a disabled attribute. Now, the other thing we've done is whenever I do that, I'll add a little spinning arrow there, and that's just using CSS to show or hide that. So down here below, we're going to first of all just say the response we're going to get from our own API endpoint here is await fetch. And here we're going to go to, let's make sure we put it in backticks here. We'll go to API books.json, and then I want to add the search param here. So this search query param that I'm going to attach to it is what we're going to pick off on the back end. That's what we haven't done quite yet. Now, first of all, I'm just going to go ahead and pass back the search directly like this, and I'll show you some errors we're going to get with that in a second. But now that I hit this, let's go ahead and come to our back end here and make sure that we can actually grab that query param. So let's go ahead and grab it. We're going to just call it query, and this will be a new URL. There are other ways to do this in Astro, but just to kind of keep it more generic, I'm doing it like this. We're going to pass in the request.url, and then we'll search params and just pick off the get for the one called search. So whatever is called like question mark equals search, that's the one I'm going to get right here. Now remember, we want to return early if they don't provide that, because if there's no query, we can't do anything with it. So let's go ahead and say if they don't have that, we just want to return in a response. Let's see, actually, let's just throw an error. I guess we don't really need an error. We'll just return an empty array. So they didn't provide anything. We can just return nothing. Yeah, so let's do that. So we'll say new response. And here, oops, not that, a new response. Here we're going to have json.stringify. And I just want to return data. This will just be an empty array. So we'll say basically there is no data, and the error will be null because they didn't really have an error. They just didn't provide any search, so we can't really do anything with it. So now I know down here I should actually have a search query that's been passed along. So I can replace this right here with that search query. Now here, notice they've hard-coded it, so it's URI encoded. We're going to do that ourselves on the front end in just a second, but for now I'm just going to pass in my query right here. So this means I should be able to pass in any query I want and then return it down this way. So let's come back over here and let's just pass in a query. In fact, let's make sure we do this from the front end. So let's come back over here, and once we get this back, let's just say const data equals await res.json. We still need to check to make sure we get res back okay. So let's do that first, I guess. So let's say if res.okay, and we're going to check if that's not the case, like that. Then we're going to throw a new error, which we'll catch in a little bit. And this will say something like unable to fetch books or something like that. Okay, and then assuming I get back my data, I want to console log this here on the front end. So it should show up right down this way. So we'll say something, let's say like Lord of the Rings, and hit search. Now when I get this back here, you'll notice I get back my data with my 6 items. Lord of the Rings, it should have all the stuff I need, and this is coming from my API endpoint dynamically, right? Whatever I pass in. Now, notice one thing, we've not set this to disabled false, so it's just spinning kind of relentlessly. So we'll get to that in a second. There are other problems that we may face though. So let's say that instead of passing in something like Lord of the Rings, I pass in something else. So we could say like Sarah's Revenge or something. I don't know where that came from. But sometimes you'll actually get an error if you have like an apostrophe here. It's not showing that for me right here. Maybe if I do this, that will work. But all that to say, typically you need to URI encode this. So what I want to do is instead of passing this in just as a string on the front end, I want to make sure that I URI encode this. So let's just go ahead and encode a URI component like this. And then I will pass in search. Now you probably also want to come in here, and I'll just go ahead and put this here. You probably also want to make sure you like sanitize the input if this is going to be like a professional grade application, because as people are sending data in, you never want to trust the user. Always basically sanitize whatever they give you, but I'm not going to do that in this tutorial because we're really just trying to focus on the core of create, read, update, and delete. All right, so hopefully that makes sense why we are using the URI encoding here. Now, all this should be correct, right? And we're actually querying this right here, making sure we've got something that's passed on in the search query param, and then passing back the actual book data down this way once we've processed it the way we want to, and only kind of pass back stuff to the front end that we want it to have. All right, so let's close that one down. We should be good there. Let's stick now to the front end and do a little bit more. One thing we need to think of here is if we're going to say res.okay is not true, I need to make sure that I catch this down this way. So let's do the same kind of thing. We'll console.error, and this will be server side or client side in this case. And I just want to console log the error, right? So I'll just do it like that. And then next, I want to make sure that I remove the attribute here of disabled. So let's go ahead and come in here. I'm going to grab all this, and I want to remove the attribute, not has attribute, but remove attribute like that. And that way we can actually use the form again if we have an error. We'll have to do the same thing up here once we get back data, but one thing at a time, right? Now you might remember that we set up our API endpoint to give us both data and errors, right? So if we have an error, we should be able to handle that. Otherwise, we should get it back as data. Now, I'm just destructuring these. I could obviously call this anything I want. Like I could call it data and then check here on the data.data or data.error, but let's just destructure it to keep it easier for us. Okay, so if we get back an error, I want to go ahead and make sure we throw an error. So I'll get back an error. If that happens, I want to go ahead and throw a new error, and that error will just be whatever error that was passed in, right? So the error right here, that will be passed on down this way, which means let's also catch that. So on the front end, just to kind of keep stuff simple here, I'm going to have an alert where it just says that if the error is an instance of the error, again, this is the TypeScript thing, then we're going to go ahead and pass along the error message. Otherwise, we'll just pass along the whole thing. So if it can tell that it's an error, do that. Otherwise, we'll just say that this should be, actually, let's just pass in like unknown error. I think that's what we did on the back end as well. So here we go. If we catch any errors, we'll log it client side in the dev tools. We'll then remove the attribute of disabled and throw up an alert for the user. So just to make sure this is actually working, I guess let's like mess that up. Come over here and say like something and hit there. And now it says unable to fetch books, which is this one right here. Perfect. Okay, so it is actually working. If we get an error from the back end, it should also catch it right here, throw it down this way, and throw up an alert as well. Okay, so now that we've checked for the error, let's next come in here and make sure we handle the data that's being passed in. Now we want to do a couple of things here. I want to display this in cards down this way, right? So in order to do that, I need to take the data I'm receiving, loop through each of those items, and output a bit of HTML for all of them. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Down here, we'll say something like, well, I guess we need to actually insert this into the HTML. So let's come back up top here because we don't yet have access to this new book list, which we need. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this down right here. We're going to call this new book list. And then here, again, just swap this out and we'll call this HTML UL list element. All right, so in this new book list, now I want to insert the HTML here. So we'll come in here, say the new book list dot inner HTML. Again, you definitely want to make sure you sanitize this, but let's go ahead and grab the data.map over that data. And I know that each of these items should have my book, right? They should be in the form of the book. So if I come over here to my books type, it's this one right here, this type of book. They should all look exactly like this. They don't technically have a status yet. I will actually add that, but that's okay. All right, TypeScript doesn't need to know. I won't tell them if you don't tell them. Let's go ahead and pull in that. And it should have pulled it in at the top of this script tag. It does. Okay, cool. So let's come over here. Now that we've mapped over each of these items, what I want to do is pass each of these to a little function that will generate HTML for each of the data points that have been passed back from our API. Now I'm just going to call this render book card HTML, and then we'll pass it the book. So this should actually give us this all back, and we're going to join this now because it'll be an array. We'll just join it on nothing. All right, so let's go ahead and write this up top here, and I'll do this outside of this event listener. So we'll say like helper functions, and this will be called render book card HTML. I should mention I did not use React for this. This might be something I use React for normally, but I figured those of you who know React, it's built on top of JavaScript, obviously. It's a JavaScript framework, so you should be able to take normal JavaScript and convert it to React. JavaScript is kind of the base foundation. So that's why I'm sticking with this for now. So as I get each of these items here, I know I'm going to get in the actual structure, right? The book itself. So let's go ahead and call that book, and it should be the same typing that we expect. And then here, I just want to return, and I guess we could just do this implicitly. I want to return an li. This li, like this, is going to return to us all the data that we need in here. Now, I could type this out manually, or I could just paste it in for you. So I think I'm going to do a little bit of both just to kind of show you what I'm doing, and then you can copy this from the code, or I'll try to remember to include it in the actual description for the lesson. So we're going to give this a class of book card, and then I want three things. I want the image right here, I want an H2 right here, I want the author right here, and then finally I want a button. So again, I'm just going to paste this in so you don't have to watch it. So notice the SRC is going to be the book.cover. The alt will be the book.title. I'm going to lazy load it. Decoding equals async, and then add a class here. Now we'll have an H2 for each of these. This will be the book title. Then we'll have here them listed by the author, where we're going to list out that author array in a nice readable way if it has multiple authors. And then finally, we'll add a button here with a button and the class of add book checkbox. Now we're going to do something else a little bit odd here, and that is I'm going to actually pass along the entire data for the book. So the whole object in this data book attribute. So this data set attribute is going to contain an object. Now, once again, we can have some odd things here where like an apostrophe doesn't quite work the right way. And it will try to wrap that in the HTML and just kind of throw an error. So I need to encode this as a URI component as well. And I'm JSON stringifying the actual book and encoding it inside of there. So let's see how this actually works in a second. But first of all, what is going on here? Tbook like that. Okay, there we go. So now I should get each of these back here down this way, and I'm going to actually insert it into the kind of hidden UL list down this way. So let's say like Lord of the Rings, and I hit search, and it should be doing that. And now it's not going to disable JSON map is not a function. Well, JSON is not the method I want anyhow. This should be join. Hopefully I said that right earlier, but I didn't type it right. Let's say Lord of the Rings and try again. And I should get back all this data. And now it's actually inserting it into this structure I have right here. So if I come inside here, you'll notice I've got a couple things that we've done a little bit odd. So here's the actual image. Let's pull this down here. The button itself has this data book attribute that has this URI encoded content for everything connected to that item. Now I'm doing it so that I can actually take this and pass it along to my database, right? And I'll unencode that or decode that and then actually insert it. There are other ways, of course, you could do this, but for me, this was the easiest because it's not a lot of data I'm getting back. So this is how I decided to do it. But suffice it to say, we're actually getting back the data we expect. Now, there's one more thing we need to do, and that is to make sure that we actually allow people to retype, right? So I need to come over here and remove that attribute. Didn't we have that somewhere down this way? Yeah, right here. So let's go ahead and say if it is okay. After we do all that, we want to make sure we remove that attribute. So let's do that right down here, assuming that I get that back successfully. We'll say Robin Sloan again, hit search. Once I get it back, it should actually show me that and allow me to retype in if I want to. So here's a bunch of stuff by Robin Sloan. Okay, cool. So we've actually got what we need. The next thing I want to do is hook up this button right here. So where I click it, it takes all that data that's been encoded and passes it along to a new API endpoint that then adds it to our Astro DB. So hopefully that makes sense. We're hitting an API endpoint, getting back the data we want, transforming it. Now we're going to click add to library and do the exact same thing and attach to it an attribute like to read or reading or read. Now we'll do this in the reverse order. We're going to actually set up the front end in the next video, and then the following video, we'll set up a post endpoint at the same route, books.json. All right, now I want to make sure that when I search for something like Lord of the Rings and I get this back, that I can click add to library and something actually happens. Now the trouble is I don't actually have this HTML present, so I can't set event listeners on each of the buttons. I can, however, use event propagation. So I can set an event listener on the entire UL here, and anytime I click within it, can check what I've clicked on. And if I've clicked on something that has the right class, like an add to library button, it will then run my actual event, right? So that's what we're going to do. So instead of running off the new book search or anything like that, we're going to actually use this new book list and set a separate event listener. So let's come in here. I'm going to add on this new event list here. We're going to do add event listener, and we're just going to listen for a click. Now this should be an async one as well. We're going to grab the event. And the first thing I want to do is check to see what type of target it is. So what we're going to do is check the e.target. Now, there's kind of a difference between current target and target. And if you don't know the difference here, current target is whatever you've set the event listener against. So anytime you click the actual UL, it's going to look at just the current target. The target is the thing you clicked, the actual item that you clicked, right? Not the thing it's set against. Because if I come inside this UL, I could click on here, I could click on the book, on the title, on anything else, and I want to see what that is. So maybe just to show this off, let's say console.log, and I'll show exactly what I mean here. So if I come over here, let's open this up, and I say something here, and I should get back something as a response. If I click here, you'll notice I'm clicking on the LI. Here, I'm clicking on the H2. Here, I'm clicking on the paragraph. So I'm clicking on different things. That target, what I want to know is if I click on anything that has the class add book checkbox, right? That tells me that I've clicked on one of those buttons. So that's what we're going to check against here. So we'll say if here the e.target does not have the class list. So we'll say if it has no class list that contains add book checkbox. So if that's the case, I know I have not clicked on one of those buttons and I just want to return, right? I don't need to do anything else. Now TypeScript's going to yell at me here because it's saying, hey, I don't know what the e.target is. So I can actually tell this, all right? I can say that it is an HTML element. So I'll just wrap this in parentheses and say as HTML element. And now it knows it's an element, which means it should have a class list. So I'm saying, hey, if it doesn't have a class, this class right here, just forget about this entire event listener. So I've kind of up front cut out anything I don't want. So I only want the buttons, which means right here, I know I should have the buttons. Now remember, each of those buttons has a data attribute with all the content I want to pass along to my database. So we're going to grab that and I'll store it in something called book data. And here I'm just going to json.parse. And what I want to do is decode what I passed in as an encoded URI component. So I'll say decode URI component, e.target. And I know that this is an HTML button element. So let's go ahead and do that. Actually, I think I need to wrap this in parentheses. So we'll say e.target as HTML button element. And again, this is just a TypeScript thing, but now I know that's what it is. I can pick off of this the data set dot book, and this will be a string. So I know I've passed this in as a string. I can decode that, and that should give me back the actual structured data. So let's see that happen here in real time. So I'll come over here and say book, and I should get back some kind of book. If I click anywhere, nothing will happen unless I click on something that has the add book checkbox. So I've done that here, and notice I'm actually getting this back as structured data. So it's decoded this and then parsed this with JSON, so I get this back as an actual object. So now I'm ready to pass this on to my endpoint, right? So that's what we're going to do. So let's come in here. I know I actually have something now. Now you could check off of this to make sure you have it. In this case, I know because I put it in there. So I'm just going to leave it real simple here. We're going to say that I want to go ahead and hit an endpoint. We're going to create this in a second in the next video, but we'll call this fetch. And it's the same thing, right? So this is API books.json, except in this case, we're not going to do a GET request, but a POST request. So like this. I do need to go ahead and set the headers here. And the content type will be application/JSON. And then for the body, I just want to pass on JSON.stringify, and we're just going to stringify that book data. So if I want to, I could actually just grab it like this, right? And I don't have to decode it. I just wanted to show you what that looked like, or I don't have to parse it, because then I can just pass it along directly here, and it should be an actual string. So I don't have to stringify it at that point. I could just pass it in just like that. Now we're going to hit that endpoint in a second. And when we do, we'll get back data. So we should go ahead and do the same little check we've done so far, which is if res.ok. If that's not the case, then throw a new error where we'll say failed to add book. Please try again later, or something like that. All right, then down here, I should get back just like we did on our get endpoint, we'll do the same thing in our post. So we could be able to destructure here data and error. Here we'll just await res.json, which is what we'll get back from our endpoint. And like before, we'll say if there is an error. In fact, let's just copy a lot of this over because I don't really want to retype this all out. Yeah, right here. So if error, we'll just grab all this and paste it in down here. So like that. Obviously, we don't have a notebook list. All this kind of stuff doesn't matter. This also doesn't matter. And we'll do the same thing here though. So if there's an error, go ahead and throw that and throw a console log as well. Now, the last thing I want to do is make sure I redirect to our dynamic endpoint. So I'll come in here to catch. And what we'll say is redirect to the book. And I'll say window.location, location.href. And here this is just going to be at book. And then we'll have book data.id. Now, because I'm actually picking this off now, I do actually want to set this off as json.parse. I'd forgotten I did that. So let's come down here to json.parse. And we'll parse it here. Or I guess we could parse it down below. It's not a big deal. However you want to do this, I can now json.stringify the book data. And now this is an actual object where I can pick off the ID. So once I get back a successful response that it's actually added it to my database, I can just redirect to book / whatever the ID happens to be. Now this is a hard tutorial, this video in particular, because we can't actually see anything happening here quite yet. But what I can do is come over here. I should actually, when I try to hit this, it should throw a new error. So I can at least see that that part is working. So let's come over here. We'll do like Robin Sloan and search for that. And now if I click on one of these, add to library, it should say failed to add book because this endpoint does not yet exist. So it's at least working as far as we know. Next video, we want to actually set up that post endpoint at the same route at books.json. In the last video, we went ahead and made it to where when we click on add book, it hits this endpoint with a post request, which we have not yet set up. And that's what we're going to do in this video. So here's our GET request. Let's go ahead and close that one down. I'm going to come over here to export const, and we're going to do a post request, which will also have an API route as the type. So let's make this an async request. And here, once again, we just want to grab the request. So I'll come over here. And the first thing I need to do is go ahead and grab the data. And so this will be await response or request.json like this. This should get us back the body of the post request. So when we send that post request, we send along a body with it, and that's what we want to check against. So first of all, let's go ahead and just say, let's set up a try catch once again, and we'll come in here and say that if there's no data, and we could also say like if the data doesn't have title as a property there, which it should, but you could technically hit this endpoint from anywhere, I suppose. Same thing, it needs an author as well, and it also needs a cover, and it also needs an ID. So if it doesn't have any of those items, then I want to go ahead and just throw an error. So you could say throw new error. We could say something like no book selected. And we probably also want to come in here and we would check each type as well. So like make sure that it's a type of string. And again, you probably want to do some kind of sanitation. So and sanitize as well if you wanted this to be actually kind of worthy of production. But for now, that's all we're going to do as a simple check. Now down here, let's go ahead and catch all this as well. So we'll say we're going to console.log. I'm not sure why I've got a const here. Console.log the error. And we'll do the same kind of thing we've done before where we return any response. And just like we did with our get endpoint, I want to stringify an object. This object is going to have two things. It'll have data, in which case will be null for the error. And for the error, we will do the same thing we did up top. So let's go ahead and copy this, because I think that'll be faster right in here. I'll close this back down and we'll paste this in right here. All right, so it should be, if it's an error, it should give us back the message. Otherwise, it'll just pass along the entire thing. Okay, so now we're actually returning something there. But what happens if there is data and it has a title, an author, a cover, and an ID? Well, here's where we want to store this in our database. Now, this is actually going to look a lot like what we did in our seed file to start with. db.insert, book, values, all that kind of stuff, right? So let's come over here and we'll do that. So let's just call it something like db data. This will be await, and then we'll paste in all that. Await db. Let's go ahead and pull this in from Astro DB. Should have pulled it up top. It does. The other thing I know I'm going to want here is book. So let's go ahead and pull that in as well. We'll come back down here and we've got this now. What we want to do is pass along values. What are those values? Well, if we just go ahead and pass in the data we got back, right? That should be our object. That works. The only trouble here is it doesn't actually have a status. Remember, we kind of lied about that a little bit. We told TypeScript it was there, but it wasn't really. So that's what we want to do right now. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in this data like this. And then I'm going to say that the status, so I'm going to spread it in and then add the status here as to read. That was one of our 3 options, and it needs to be spelled just like that for the typing. So we should get back data and an error as well. So let's go ahead and come in here. And in fact, I think the way this works, if I were to grab this and look over this, see, it's a result set. So it should give us back our data. If there's an error, it'll actually throw it for us automatically, which means it'll be caught down this way. So let's just return a new response here, and a response like that. And this will be JSON.stringify. And here I want to stringify the same kind of object. We're going to have a data, and that will just be our DB data. We're not really going to use that on the front end, but just in case people need that, you can use that, and then we'll have nothing for the error. So if this works correctly, let's go ahead and walk through the steps. When I go ahead and add something like Robin Sloan, and I search, it should give me these back. When I go to click on this, it should first of all check to make sure that whatever I clicked on inside of the UL actually has this class of book checkbox, book checkbox. Assuming it does, it's going to go ahead and parse off the book data that I embedded in that button. Then it's going to try to hit my endpoint with a post endpoint. So it's going to come over here and it's going to look for a post endpoint. It finds one right here, and then it's going to grab the data that I pass along right here. So I stringified the data and passed it in. If there's any kind of error with the actual request, it will throw an error here. Otherwise, it's just going to get back data and error. If there's an error here, again, it will throw it. Otherwise, it should just be successful and redirect me to that book page, which we have not yet set up. So back over here, once we actually have the data, that will include the author, the title, the cover, the ID, and we will spread in the status. If it doesn't have any of those, it will throw an error. Otherwise, it's just going to insert this into our database. And then it should get us back the data right here, which we're not going to use, but at least we will know that there is no error. All right, now, why are we doing this part on the backend? Well, once again, everything in the API route here, all of these API routes, these are server-side routes. That means we get the standard protections with those routes. So people can't actually like query our database or anything like that from this. All they can do is do a get or a post endpoint, and we decide what data they get back. In this case, we're getting them back the data right here. In the GET request, we're getting them back the data that we've kind of processed from the OpenLibrary API. So if we did all this correctly, I should be able to click Add to Library, and what's going to happen? It should go ahead and add it, and then redirect us to book and whatever it happens to be. Now, again, we haven't set that up, so that's going to throw an error for now. But let's go ahead and do another one. We'll come in here and say, like, I don't know, The Hobbit, and this is another one of those Lord of the Rings kind of things. It gives us another book. So let's now come back to the home page, and I'll return to that index. And we're going to go ahead and just console log these books, which it looks like we've already done. So in the log, we should get those. And you can see here, I've got my one that I added. This was my seed data. And then the 2 extras that I added. Now, whenever you're working in dev mode here in Astro DB, you'll notice this works just fine. But if I were to go ahead and refresh and restart the server, it clears out everything except for the stuff in my seed data, which means I only get the 1 book. So that's just something to be aware of. This is just in dev mode. It's not actually storing it in production database. It's just local. In fact, you can inspect this if you want to by coming over here to the .astro and looking at the content DB. And you can see here that I've got this little helper that lets me see SQLite data here. It's just an extension, but you can see that I've actually got all this showing right here. I can click inside here. Let's see. I can click inside here, and it actually shows me all this as well. So this is what I'm storing. Obviously, this one's from the seed data, but if I were to add additional ones, so again, like Sloan, come over here and add this here, and I come over here and refresh, you'll see that now it adds another one here to my local database file. When I restart my server, though, obviously it's going to clear all of that out. All right, so we've done a lot. We've added Astro DB. We've created the GET backend and frontend requests, the POST frontend and backend requests. Next, let's go ahead and create the dynamic route for showing the book so that we don't just have to look at this 404 page. In this video, we want to set up the dynamic route for the /book and then whatever the ID happens to be. Now, I've just got our seed data here showing the ID of 1, or you might remember that's what we set this up as having that ID. So how do we actually display this data here? Well, I want to come back over here to our pages, and I'm just going to create a new folder. We're going to call this book, since that's the kind of the sub route right here. And then inside of here, I want to create a dynamic route, which we're going to do like this. And I'm just going to call id.astro. Now, I'm calling it ID like that in brackets so that it can be a dynamic value. Now, let's go ahead and close this down. And up top here, we want to go ahead and destructure the ID from the astro.params. This all happens client side, our server side. So I should be able to get this before we ever display anything on the client. Now, down below here, the first thing I want to do is check to see if that exists. So for some reason it doesn't exist. It should go ahead and just return here an astro.redirect, where we'll redirect back to the home page. All right, so down here we should actually have something, right? So let's go ahead and query our books. We're going to do this by awaiting DB. This is going to come from astro.db in a second, .select. And this is very much like what we did on the home page. But here we're going to say from, and we're going to grab the book itself. And some of these things aren't importing for whatever reason. So let's come back up here, and I'm just going to manually type them out. So we'll say import DB. I'm also going to want book, and I'm also going to want a helper called EQ, which helps me equate two items. And this is all from Astro:DB. All right, so I'm going to select the book where, and this where clause is important because what I want to do is pass an EQ, and I want to pass kind of two items. The first will be the book.id. All right, so the individual book.id, does that match the actual param ID that's been passed in? Now there should only ever be one of these, right? Only one should ever match. So the books should just have the single item that we care about. We'll call this T book like this, and we'll pull this in as a type as well. So now let's go ahead and destructure off of this the items that we want, just to make it a little bit easier as we template this out. So I'm going to want the author, I'm going to want the cover, I'm going to want the ID, the status, let's see, title. I guess we want it all, right? And I guess this ID, we're going to need to rename this, right? Because I already have ID for my param. So I could just say that this is going to be called book ID, right? So we should get all these items back. Let's go ahead and console log this right here. So if I do that on the server side, I should actually get this stuff back. So if I refresh here, let's see, here it is. Yep, all this stuff back. So cool. So I'm getting it back. Now I know I actually have a route. Let's say, however, that I go to something like 12. Now this doesn't actually exist. So you can see it tries to destructure all this and it just doesn't exist. So that's no good, right? I guess the next thing I need to do is say that if the books.length equals to 0, we're going to do the very same thing. We'll just return back to the home page like that. So you see it goes right to the home page. Let's come back over here. If I have books.one, that should show all this data. So we've checked to see if our database has something. If it does, then we show it. If it doesn't, we redirect to the home page. Now, all that's left here is to add our base layout like this. And inside the base layout, we're going to add a few things. So I need to go ahead and make sure I have my title that I pass along. This will be the actual title. The description, we can just use the site-wide description. And then I want to go ahead and display the data down this way. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and have a div with the class of grid medium. Again, this is just from the CSS I set up. And then we'll have another one inside here called book layout like that. And this is where we'll put all the content. And down below here, we're going to have our remove button. So this button right here is going to say remove from library. And we need to add a couple of things here. So first of all, let's have a class here. This is going to have remove book button, and then the button, and we'll have a warning class to set the red color, warning like that. And then finally, I want to make sure that this has an ID attribute of book ID, right? The ID from the actual item in our database. Now we're going to use this to where when we want to delete it, we can actually use the ID here that we've clicked on to then go ahead and dynamically like remove that individual book. So if we've done all that correctly, I should be able to come over here. You'll see that we actually get remove library. Now let's go ahead and add our content in here. And I've got some pre-built styles again that should help us out. So we're going to take our image first of all. This is just going to be our cover. And then the alt here, as we've done before, will be our title. Now I've gone ahead and set a width manually on here so it doesn't have like jumping as it moves around. This happens to match what I've got in the CSS as well. Again, there are other ways to do this even with like the Astro image component, but I just wanted to keep it real simple here. So I've got the image tag. Next, I've got this grid small container. And right here, we've got a few things. We've got the H1. This will be our title. Then we've got the author pill like that. And all you have to pass in is the actual author. So I'm going to just say author should just be that array of authors. And then finally, for the last thing would be our reading select. And we're going to pass in the select data, which is what that requires. Let's close this one off. And this one needs two things. It needs the status like that. And it also needs the ID, which will just be our book ID. Now, if you want to, you could just pass in the entire structure, but the way I've got this reading select set up, it only expects those two items. So that's what we're going to pass in. So you can see that that's exactly what it's doing right here. It should show both of those things right next to each other. Obviously, if you want to make this more dynamic, you're welcome to do that as well. Right now, it's not. Maybe you want to do that. We could even do that right now. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to come over here to the CSS and let's look for book list. What do we call that thing? Book layout. So book layout. And here this does have display flex. And let's go ahead and set the flex wrap to wrap like that. I'll go ahead and update this in the CSS so you don't have to do that. But now if I come over here, that should work. If I open it up like that, that should be next to each other and it should wrap down as needed. So there we go. It's slightly more like performant or dynamic than I originally set it up as. All right, so that's all we need right now. Obviously, we haven't yet set this up to switch. It looks like it switched in the UI, but when I refresh, it's just going to grab that live from the database. This button doesn't work either. Nothing happens when I click it. So we also don't have anything showing on this homepage. So there's a couple things left to do, and that's what we'll do in the following lessons. In the last video, we made it to where if you search for a book and you add it to your library, you'll go to that page and the page actually shows properly. Now there's three things we haven't done yet. This drop down right here, the remove button, and then we haven't shown things on the homepage, right? So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to start with this one right here. Now, ultimately what I want to do is group the books array by the status. And there are some methods coming in JavaScript that allow you to do this, but for now, I'm going to go ahead and use a reduce method that allows us to shape the data the way we want. So we're going to call this books by status, and this will be books.reduce. And we're going to take in two things here, the accumulated value kind of as we iterate through this, and then the book itself, which we will go ahead and type as tbook. For some reason, it is not pulling that type in, so I'll fix that right here. Let's just import type of tbook. Let's see, there we go. All right, so now it knows that this is the type of tbook. What I want to do then is shape the data to start with. So I'm going to have this object have three properties. We're going to have reading. We'll also have to read like that, and then read. So this should mimic the same structure we expect, right? So these three things will be the statuses. We're going to push in any book that matches that status. So all I have to do is come in here. We're going to take the book.status, and then we're simply going to push it into that given property, right? So like that. Now, I also probably should come up here and let's go ahead and take this await.db and let's type this and just say we know what it is because we're the ones who inserted it. We're going to call this tbook. Again, there's probably some safer ways to do that. Now we've pushed it in here, but we've not yet returned it. So I now need to return the ACC, which now sends it back along. Now, a couple other things we need to think about. This says this is a type of never. Part of that is just because I need to type this thing at the end. I can just say that this is a record. And the record is basically saying this is an object that has a property name and a value. So let's go ahead and give those property names and values. We're going to take the tbook and just say it's the type of status, it's the name of the property. That's reading, to read, and read. And then the value here would be tbook like this, and it's just an array of that value. So now if I come in here and I add it right here, this should show me over here that I've got reading, I've got one item, to read, I've got one item, and I don't have anything in read. All right, so now we've got those set up and ready to go. So what do we do with these? Well, now I want to display them. So let's come down this way. And what I want to do is for each of these sections, we're just going to check if there's anything in that array. If there's anything in the reading array, the to read array, or the read array. So we're going to say books by status dot reading dot length. If that's more than 0, then I want to go ahead and output some HTML. This will be a section with a class of book list section wrapper, just like that. It's also helpful to give these sections ARIA labels, or you can point them to an ID as well to describe what they are. That sets it off as a region, which is good for accessibility. So I could say like books, I'm currently reading. And then down below here, we're going to have an H2 that says currently reading. And then I'll have a UL with a class of book card list. And then finally, let's just map through those. So I'm going to take books by status dot reading dot map. And I want to take that book, which should already be typed for me, and I want to simply output it as a book card, where the book itself is the book that gets passed through. All right, we've done that before actually in the very beginning lesson, where I'm showing anything and you see it shows up right there. So anything that matches that, we're passing to this book card, just sending the whole book to it, and it will figure out what to do. So the nice thing is we're going to have 3 sections that look very similar. So instead of reading, I'm going to take read, or why don't we do to read next? All right, as long as that is more, then I'm going to come in here and say books. We could say something like, I want to read. We'll just call this want to read. And then once again, I'll change this to read, or to read. And it looks like that next one comes in. All right, perfect. Last thing we need to do then is come down here. We're going to come to read.length. This will also be read.length. We'll say books I've read. And this will say the same thing, books I've read. All right, so just like that, now we should have 3 sections. Obviously, I don't have another book that I've already read, so let's come over here and let's add that. So we'll say like The Hobbit and we'll add that right here. Now, there's no way for me to change this, but I can come over to the .astro files and actually manually change that. Actually, I don't think I can here with this extension. Let's see. Will it let me? Read only, read only. All right, well, you're just going to have to wait until the next lesson then, where I'll show you how to do that. So in the next lesson, let's do the front end to work this right here, where we're going to be able to pass that to a backend function that will then update that in our database. The next section we want to work on is this select right here. You can see how I can change it in the UI, but as soon as I refresh, it reads from the database, so nothing's really being changed. Now I can do it from there, or I can also do it from the individual book page right here. Again, same problem. I refresh and it goes back to reading. So this is just the kind of the seeded data right here. So obviously none of this makes sense. But what we want to do is come into this reading select, which is used in both of those sections, and write a little script tag. And so we're going to work on the front end. This video, the next video, we'll work on handling this all in the back end. So the first thing I need to do is grab all these reading selects wherever they show up on the page. So we might have multiples on the page depending on what's going on. So let's go ahead and just take these as reading selects. And this will be document.querySelectorAll. And we're simply going to select anything with a class of reading select. And I'll just set this up as a node list of, and this will be HTML select elements like that. Okay, so now we've got a node list of those. We're just going to do an event listener for each item in that list. So we'll say reading selects dot for each. For each of these selects, which we'll just call select, that seems to make sense. We're going to come in here and add a select.add event listener. Now we're listening for the event of change. So anytime it is changed, then I simply want to take the event and do something with it. Now this does need to be an asynchronous call because we're going to have to wait on our API endpoint. So I'll come inside here. We're going to have a try catch, just like we've done in lots of our other endpoints here. So first of all, let's go ahead and const res, and we're going to write this to a dynamic API endpoint. Now right now we've got everything at books.json, but I also want to have this at like books/1.json. And that way we can set this up for both the delete and also for these selects to individually hit those dynamically based on the ID that's passed in. So we're going to fetch right here. And this needs to be dynamic, so I'm going to put it in backticks. We'll do API books, and then this will simply be the select.dataset.id. Now this again will be at /books/ whatever the ID is .json. Now where am I getting this dataset ID? Well, I'm getting it from right here, right? I've passed in the ID. We didn't do this. I had this pre-written for you, but you can see how what I'm doing is whenever this is changed, I'm then taking the ID right here. Now I could just add this as the ID, but I think I used the ID somewhere else in the site. I don't remember where, so I wanted to just tie it directly to the select itself. So when that happens, I want to not just send a GET request, which this would be a GET request by default. Instead, I want to change the method here. Let's see, method. We're going to change this to patch. So this will allow us to update that. Now I need to also pass along some data in the body. So what we're going to do is set the content type here. This will be application JSON. And then let's actually send along the body as part of this request. So the body will simply be the JSON.stringify, and I want to simply pass on the new status, right? So whatever the new status is. Now, currently it's going to be whatever it is in the database, but when I change this, the selected one will actually move in the UI to whatever I've changed it to. And that will also get passed along with the event. So what I'm going to do is stringify that select status. So we'll have an object here where we have the status as the property, and the select.value will be the value that's newly been selected. So once we hit our API endpoint, we should do the same checks we've been doing so far. So I'm going to come in here. We'll just say if not res.ok. So if there's a problem there, we're going to throw a new error. So we'll throw new error. This will be something like failed to update status. Please try again. All right, and like we've done before, we need to go ahead and catch this down below. So we're going to say console.error like that, and then we'll console the error. And then like we've done before, we're going to take this and add it to an alert if it comes through. So once we get back a positive response, which we shouldn't yet, right, because we haven't actually gotten anything back, we will then get back our data. So whatever this response is, we could call it data or something like that for await res.json, but we're going to set it up with the same kind of structure where we can destructure both the data and the error. So we've set all of our API endpoints up to work that way. So then all we have to do is say that if there is an error, then we want to throw a new error, and that error will simply be the error that was passed in. And this is throw, not through. Now we're not going to do anything with the data. However, if I'm on the home page, I want like everything to resort. So I actually want to refresh if I'm on the home page. So what we're going to do is say like if on home, refresh. All right, so let's just go ahead and check the window location. So I'm going to say window.location.pathname if this equals to the home page, right? If that's the case, then I'll just window.location.reload. Okay, cool. So now I should be able to actually hit this. Now, when I do this, because we haven't set up this endpoint, it should throw an error, which will be either unknown error or it probably should be this one, right? Because the res will not be okay. So let's see if that works. All right, perfect. So it is actually working the way we expect. In the next video, we'll go ahead and set up this API endpoint dynamically to receive this patch method. It's time to set up a dynamic endpoint to receive this patch request. So let's come over here. What I want to do is move into this API, and we're going to create a new folder called books. And that's because I want to have inside of here a dynamic route, which would be ID like this .json.ts. Now, to kind of simplify this, let's actually move this in here as well. We're just going to call this index.json.ts. Now, by default, since it's in the books folder, this will still receive the same endpoint, right? So anything that goes to API books.json will be right here. Anything that goes to API books / whatever the ID is will go right here. And that way we can be more dynamic with these targeted requests. So let's come inside here. And the first thing I want to do is export a const called patch. Again, this needs to be all uppercase. That is the convention here for, or the requirement here for Astro. Then we're going to come in here with an async request. And here I need two things. In fact, I need the request, and then I also need the params. Now, the reason I need the params is because the params allow me to pick off the ID that's been passed in. Now, I could include that as part of the body, but just wanted to rehearse another way to work with API endpoints. And typically, if I'm targeting something specific by ID, I like that to be part of the actual request. So I'll come inside here. We're just going to simply destructure the ID from the params. And that gets passed along with this request. Now, as we've seen before, we're going to need to return a response either way. Let's go ahead and set up another try catch like that. And I can grab a lot of the same stuff we used over here. So let's grab this right here, and I'm just going to pop this in right here. That should be very much the same because, again, we're trying to handle the data the same way, where we always return it. That looks just like this with the data and error. Let's go ahead and come down here. We're going to do the same thing here, except in this case, obviously, we won't have an error. So this should be null. And right now we can just return that as well. And I guess this needs to be inside the try, right? Otherwise we just skip all that altogether, just like that. Okay, so obviously we don't want to return no data. So what I want to do is pick off that individual property. Now the first thing I want to do is inside this try, so that way I can use the catch if there is an error. I want to check that there is data. So I need to make sure that there is data, and I need to make sure that the data.status exists. In other words, I pass that along. And there also needs to be an ID. So let's make sure that there's an ID. If that's not the case, let's throw a new error. And we'll say something like no book selected. Okay, cool. All right, now we don't actually have the data. We need to pull that in as well. So we're going to grab that from await request.json, just like we did before on that post request. So now I know I will have data. It has a status field, and it also has an ID as part of the param structure. All right, let's come down here. And let's go ahead now and update our database. Now, Astro through Drizzle gives you access to this with a specific update method. So on the DB, we're going to have update. And here what we want to do is update the book. So I should have imported both of those. You see those both came in right here. And obviously I don't want to update every book. I need to set specific values based on which ID I've passed in. All right, so what we're going to do is say I want to set the status to the data.status. In other words, the status property in my database needs to reflect the data, the body that I passed in, that property name's status. We just did that right over here, right? So we said this value is what I want to pass along right here to the database. So I'm going to set that, but again, I need to have a little where clause. Where clauses will kill you, but here what we need to do is say where something is true. So we're going to use the EQ method, which we've used before. We're going to pass in both sides of that. So where the book ID, the book I'm looping through in the database, matches, or not looping through, but selecting in the database, matches the ID of the param that I passed in. Hopefully that makes sense. Assuming that I get back something that's not an error, then I can go ahead and simply return the data right here, and we'll call this DB data as well. All right, so hopefully that should work. Hopefully that makes sense what we did as well. Let's walk through this real quick. We've gone ahead and added an event listener whenever we change this. So if I come in here to red like that, it will now change this because it sends it along to this dynamic endpoint. So it's sending it to books /1 because that's the ID of this fake book that we've added, .json. That comes to this one right here. And the first thing it does is pick off that param, which would be 1, and the data, which is the new status, which is red. Then what it does is check that those exist, otherwise it throws an error, and then it tries to update our database by setting just where the book ID in the database matches the ID that we passed in, and then we return this new response. If there's any errors, we send that back, and then we would show that on the client. Now you might remember in the last video we said if this is on the homepage, go ahead and refresh. That way it can change to books I've read here or wherever it happens to be. Now, if I come inside here and we change this to something like reading, it doesn't have to refresh. But if I come back here, now it says currently reading. So we've got this all set up and ready to go, which means the last thing we need to do is to come in here to view book and remove it from the library. Now, if I haven't mentioned this already, there are other things you would want to add to make this production ready. Part of this would obviously be adding auth. I thought about adding that, but I feel like that kind of distracts from the point of this module, which is really to rep this create, read, update, and delete. But that might be something else you want to add. And then you'd obviously also need to check like an ID of the user that saved this. And there's a lot more complexity there that I thought might be distracting for us. All right, well, let's go ahead and handle this. We're going to do it kind of in the same way. We'll work on the front end first, and then finally we'll set up the back end to also be able to remove items from the database. All right, we are now showing this page right here. This remove from library button is visible, but if I click it, nothing happens. Now I do actually have the class right here. And what we want to do is something very similar to what we did with the select, where I can select it and actually attach an event listener to it. And if I come over here, it's actually changed. So maybe let's do this. Let's open up that select, reading select, and we can copy a lot of this out of here because we're just going to switch stuff around. So let's come down here, and under the base layout, I'm going to add that script tag. Now in this case, what I want to do is look at this remove book button, and this is what we're going to add right here, remove book button, and these are all HTML button elements, right? Button elements like that. Now for each of these, let's call this something else. Let's call this like remove buttons, like that. So these remove buttons, we're going to loop through each of these, and here, whenever they are clicked, right? Whenever that happens, I want to send it to the same endpoint, except in this case, I want to pass along a delete. Now, I don't actually need to pass along anything else. If I have the ID, I can delete it from the database. So that's all good. Here, I can say failed to delete book. Please try again. And then we get the data and the error. All this should be the exact same as well, except I don't need to refresh. It should just take me back to the homepage. So let's actually do this. Let's move it like this. Get rid of this. We're going to just move back to the homepage once it deletes, right? Because it won't actually exist anymore. So we'll come in here to .href, and then we'll just say that this needs to now be the homepage, like that. So if I come over here and I click this, I should get an error, and it should pop up with an alert. Let's do that. There we go. All right, now just to make sure this is working, if we were to get this successfully, let's go ahead and come down here and say, first of all, it should just redirect us to the homepage. So it should just take us straight to the homepage. I think after that, or maybe the alert jumps in the way. So we might need to wait until the next video to do that. I thought we could get away with showing that first. All right, so we've got the front end set up. Now we just need to do the back end, which won't take long at all. We are so close to this project being done. We can now click this and we get an error, but it is at least trying to hit this back end. Now you might remember we're hitting the same endpoint, API books / whatever the ID is. So we can come into this dynamic JSON endpoint. And what we're going to do is basically do the same thing we did with the patch, except it will be a delete request. So let's go ahead and copy this down. And then I want to change this obviously to delete because I can't have two patch requests. I do not need the request at all because I don't have to worry about the body, but I will go ahead and get the ID, right? So let's get rid of this and this and this. If I don't pass in an ID that matches, I should be able to come in here. I don't need to set this. Instead of what we're going to do is just delete it, right? So let's delete like this. We're going to delete the book. And this is wherever the book matches the ID in the database that I have passed in. Now, if there's an error, it should throw that error for me down here. Otherwise, I simply want to pass back, hey, everything is good and ready to go. Now, if we've done that correctly, this should be all we need to do. Let's walk through it first, and then we'll actually test it out. So these remove buttons all have an event listener added to them, where when we click them, they hit the endpoint with this delete method and the ID passed in as one of the params, or as the param of the URL. Then what we're going to do is just check that we got an OK response. Now, when that goes over here, it hits this, it recognizes its delete method. So it looks at this function right here. It picks off the ID, ensures that there is one, and then it deletes that where it exists in the database. Now, if there's an error, it should throw an error for us. Otherwise, we can simply get this right here, right? So once that happens, we'll return to the front end here, the data, whatever we get back, and that the error is null. So over here, we'll know that if there is an error, we can throw an error. Otherwise, we know that the data is good. At that point, we can just go window.location.href and return it to the homepage. The book has been deleted. Otherwise, it's going to show an alert. So hopefully that is correct. Let's click it and see what happens. There we go, back at the home page. And if I come back here, it's all gone. So I might need to come in here and add another book. And once I do that, we can test it again. So let's add that. Maybe let's add another one as well. We'll go Lord of the Rings once again. I'll add that. One more. We'll say Harry Potter and add one of those. Okay, cool. So we've got all those. Let's now come in here. You'll see that they're all under want to read. Let's test everything. We'll change this one to reading, and then we'll change this one to read. So now let's actually make this big. We should have all three of those showing. We've got reading, we've got to read, and we've got books I've read. So those are all dynamically changing. And if we come in here, we can actually do the same thing, right? We can change it here, come back here. Now we should have 2 under currently reading, and everything is set. Let's go ahead and delete one of these. So I'm going to come inside here, and I can just go ahead and remove it from the library. So if I do that, like this, it should just go ahead and remove it and put me back on the home page. Now, there's a lot more you could do here, whether it's auth or handling more complex error states, whether you want to actually like make the design look decent. That's up to you. I'll let you do that. I really just wanted to focus on create, read, update, and delete. And I hope this was a big help in kind of thinking through how you might want to do this with data, real data in a database. Now, since publishing my Astro DB module, which I'll update hopefully here soon, they've decided to discontinue their like hosted version, but you can very easily use something like Terso, which is all Astro Studio was kind of wrapped behind the scenes. So to deploy this, you would just need to connect up with Terso or whatever SQLite database kind of online solution you want, and then hook this into Vercel or anything else. I should mention, if you haven't noticed yet, this is all SSR rendered. Obviously, you want this to be dynamic as each page is hit, because wherever the person is accessing this from, obviously they want to query the data at that time, not just when you statically build. So in this case, I think I set this up with Vercel. So you'd want to tie in something like Terso to Vercel. Make sure you pass along any API keys or anything like that. If you have questions about that, let me know. I'm happy to do another video explaining that, but that's kind of out of the scope of what I was trying to accomplish in this module. Okay, in the next and final module, at least for now, I'm sure I'll add more as we go, I want to look at integrating kind of a full stack environment.